On today's episode of the Real Recovery Podcast, episode number 68, we are proud to bring you the second installment in our Founding Voices series. Our guest is Roger, whose remarkable journey from addiction to recovery was first shared in episode 4. Today, Roger is a pillar in the recovery community, volunteering weekly, reaching out to newcomers, and always offering support to those just starting their path. He remains a true friend to both of your hosts and an inspiration to all who know him. Stay tuned for Roger's powerful story of hope and service.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Julie, your co-host, on this journey of healing and transformation. Together with my co-host, Peter, we dive into the heart of recovery, sharing stories that resonate with courage and inspiration.
That's right, Julie. Each episode is a new chapter in this vast narrative of recovery, and we're honored to bring them to you. But keep in mind the perspectives you'll hear are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the views of the podcast or our partners.
Indeed, while these conversations can be a powerful part of your recovery toolkit, they are not substitute for professional medical advice. We encourage you to seek guidance from your healthcare provider for any treatment-related decisions.
And if you're facing an immediate crisis, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands, don't hesitate to call the Recovery Crisis Line at 503-223-8569. That number is also on our website. Help is available 24/7.
Now let's begin our episode
of recovery, real recovery.
So you're going to ask questions for a while or
We're
throughout
say
the
hi
whole
and
thing?
talk, and then don't worry.
We're just having a conversation, and nobody else is here, so it's just us, and we just want to hear about you.
Julie's heard a lot of it, but not all of it.
Yeah. And so we just want to
Doesn't
hear about you and who you are and your experiences and the ideas that maybe from your story and from your history, somebody else will relate to a feeling or a moment. Or...
So ultimately, we're trying to help people.
Yes. Oh,
What we're
yeah.
hoping is that there's a David, there's a Daniel, right, that are having a moment and they decide to do the right thing versus the wrong
David that
thing.
passed.
Yeah, I
You
think of
remember
him
him,
often
huh?
in the car. Now, Izzy had him reach out to me. So I wanted to say
He was
welcome,
a
Roger.
sweetheart.
I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah, and the longer you've been sober, the more that hope, at least for me and Julie and most people I know, that just becomes automatic. There's no other reason why I've been given this gift if it isn't to try and help somebody else. And people will sometimes say, you're so nice to take all this time or whatever. And I'm like,
You're actually
well,
very
honey,
good at it.
how do you think I got here? There were people who helped me. My first sponsor was, I feel the same way that you do about your first sponsor. I'm liable to get emotional.
I cried, so it's okay. I
cried at the treatment center.
Look at I cried
I
during
know, I
Colette.
touched it.
So
Did you cry in front of Colette?
I cried.
Did she cry?
I cried hearing part of her story that I had, and I thought I had heard it all, but I hadn't.
I haven't heard it all.
So welcome.
Yeah.
You want to share
Welcome.
your story with us? This is
Have we
our
started?
friend Roger, and I've known Roger for a long time. He has checked on me when I've been working too much. He has met me during COVID for special outings. He's with me with our friends in the park. We do a lot together. So we're really glad you're here.
Yeah, and I am too. I've known Roger a lot less time, but for whatever reason, I felt drawn and connected to you when we first met, and that feeling's only grown. So I'm really pleased that you're here chatting with us today and sharing your wisdom. You have how many years?
It was 22 in December.
22.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it is.
It's a long
Blows
time
my
to show
mind.
up. It's awesome. And you show up. Some people,
It blows my mind, but we talk about it. AA and sobriety, it's really quite simple. It's not necessarily easy, but if you do it the way millions of us do it, it's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. I stay close to the center. I was in and out for a long time, and I kept hearing stuff like, if you want what we have, you do like we do. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. And so I picked people out that had what I wanted, and I shied away from the people who didn't. And they went to a lot of meetings. I have a sponsor today who got sober in 1975. He's coming up on, 49 years.
He was in my very first meeting ever.
Yeah, but he goes to a lot of meetings. He
He's a great
probably
man.
goes to more meetings than I do. And so there's an example. And then people who try to incorporate the steps and the traditions and the principles into their life, who not only just go to AA for 60 minutes once a week or however times, some people go once a month. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, not for you.
Yeah. I stay close to the center. I've done the steps. I firmly believe in service work. I have the privilege of sponsoring 4 men, one of which recently completed the steps for the first time. And I couldn't believe how happy I was about that, and how happy he was, and how much it meant to him. And I talked to him yesterday, and he told me how happy he is, and he's going to go spend the day with his mother, who he didn't talk to when he was drinking and using.
It's awesome.
And that sort of thing makes my day. And I never thought that possible, that a selfish, self-centered junkie drunk like me could actually care about somebody else on that level. I was just real happy that he was happy. And it's really an honor to go through the steps with somebody and to sit there and complete the 12th step. And I've been able to do that with a lot of people now.
Yeah.
Can we
But
say
that's-
one more thing about your sponsor?
Sure.
He's the only person I know that's ever brought ice cream to the meeting with his cake to celebrate his birthday.
It's a tradition. I
I
forget
know.
where it comes from.
But he's been doing it for years.
It's not Portland. It's wherever he lived before. He
And
told me about it. I
I did
don't remember.
Massachusetts before.
I guess it was Massachusetts. I have ice cream.
We're from the
In
same city.
California, there's always a cake. And if Julie's around, there's always a cake.
Yes.
Or Dawn.
Or at very least donuts.
But yeah, it's working a program. It's staying close to the center. It's using what you've learned to help other people. And the other thing that I really believe in, and I say it often, it's the only reason that I can believe that I've been sober for more than 22 years, is because my recovery is my number one priority.
Amen.
Always. And that makes so much sense to me. I've been in a lot of relationships. I've worked for many years and had a lot of things that were important to me. But when you really sit down and think about it, I have a great life today. And the number one reason that I do is because I'm clean and sober and I work a program. And if I don't have that as my first priority, then the chances of me going back out increase probably tenfold. And I don't ever want to go back. It's my priority every day. I get up, I use the bathroom, I make coffee, and then I sit with my phone. And I'm up to probably 25 people that I send some sort of affirmation to.
Wow.
And it's the way I remember when it was 5, my sponsees and maybe 1 or 2 other people, but people come along and you're like,
And if I don't get one, I say something. I heard Jen got one today, but not me.
you didn't get one.
Do you know how many times those have saved me?
I haven't been in the habit of sending it to you every day. Jen, pretty much every day since she's come in. And the same with Colette. See, you're obviously a very dear, close friend, but you've got more sobriety than I do. I don't know how much my little memes are going to help you. But anyway, that takes up time, but I feel good about it. And it's important to me. And I do it every single day.
It's your connection.
I remember when I was in Europe, I took time every morning before we went and had our croissants and, and went to the museum of the day. I would sit and make sure I had my affirmations sent. And then I went to meetings in Paris It was wonderful.
Oh, wow.
I found an English-speaking gay men's meeting, and it was so cool.
Oh, je le sais.
There were men. It wasn't just French men. It was men from all over the world. I met men from Japan, from Germany. I met people from Los Angeles. I don't remember, Holland. It was fascinating. There's probably 30 men there, and everybody spoke English. Actually, the man I was staying with had a place in Paris and a place in Fort Lauderdale, and he was an American, so he knew a lot of things like that, and I was grateful for that.
Will you tell us how you got clean and sober, where, and what led up to it?
Yeah. Well, I hear your history. How
Well,
did
you want
get
the
to-
history
Yeah.
Pierre
first?
hasn't heard it all, and I love to hear it.
So I was born just outside San Francisco, and I say that because San Francisco was where I did probably in my adult life, half of my partying was in San Francisco. So it's a big part of my story. I was born in like an upper middle class suburb of San Francisco. Mom and dad, 2 older sisters and a younger sister. I remember going to Catholic school my whole life, as my sisters, well, not my whole life, but most of my life.
I didn't know that.
My older sisters went. When I got to, I didn't think I knew that either. When I got to high school, they told me, my parents said, you can go to public high school or Catholic high school. Because after a while, that becomes a real drain on a
Finances.
household budget. Because Catholic school is very expensive. So I thought about that and I went, and it was evenly divided. About half of my friends were going to public school and half of my friends were staying with an all-boys Catholic school, Sarah High School in San Mateo, California. And so I decided I was going to stick with the Catholic high school until 2 weeks before it started. And then I realized that I didn't want it anymore, that I'd had enough of religion class and nuns and priests, and that I was going to go to the big, scary public high school.
Oh, my.
And I went to the same grammar school for 8 years, and it was like 400 kids. And every year, the same kids would go to the next grade. So I knew these people, and it was 400 people, give or take, in the whole school.
So
It's 400 students.
I went to Catholic school from 1st through 8th grade,
Me too.
then moved to Oregon and went to public school as well.
Oh, yeah.
I was so lost at first because I too had gone with the same kids you went to
Did you have
church with.
trepidation about it?
I was overwhelmed
Yeah. I was very
riding the
scared.
bus for the first time, going in the cafeteria. My little Catholic school didn't have a cafeteria. When I saw people
We didn't have a cafeteria.
When I saw people in jeans, I was like, oh, they wear jeans to school.
Did you wear a skirt?
I did, a plaid one with a
I
white
wore
shirt.
salt and pepper cords, white shirt and tie.
So plaid.
And when it was cold, we had a red knit sweater. 8 years,
Me too.
every day.
Every day.
And we had religion class. I remember in the 3rd grade, 2nd and 3rd grade, we would show up on Wednesdays because the nuns would let us have square dancing. And I, being the little gay boy, I was like, dancing? Did you say and the frosting on the cake, so to speak? They gave us donuts and hot chocolate.
Wow.
This was on Wednesdays.
How special.
I still believe this. I still believe it. I still remember this. On
That is
Wednesdays,
so
we had square
funny.
dancing. I loved it. And I really loved it that I got donuts and hot chocolate. Anyway, so when I went to high school, I was really afraid. There were more than 2,000 kids in this high school. And when you're a freshman, that's scary enough because most of them are older than you. And then most of them went to public high school, so a lot of them knew each other. I didn't know hardly anybody. And my mother was my best friend and my sisters. I was a real wimpy kind of, if you can believe it, introverted and shy. I didn't have a lot of friends. Few. My cousins were my friends and my mother was my best friend. And here I am at this public high school with 2,000 kids I don't know. So I was really scared. And freshman year, I hit the books. And most people will admit that private school is like a year ahead of public school.
It is.
Scholastically. So my freshman year, they were teaching us things that I got in the 8th grade. So I got really good grades. I wasn't using or anything. And
That is the same.
yeah. And then sophomore year, I began to realize that there were different groups that hung out together. And there were the sports guys that played basketball and football. And there were the smart guys who were in the science class. And then there were the other crowd that were in band. And then there was this group of misfits who listened to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly. That's what was going on back then. And I thought, and they used to sneak up and go in the hills and smoke. And then I learned about a place called Smokers Hill. And that's around the same time.
Smokers Hill.
Smokers Hill. And that's around the same time that I first began to experiment with drugs. I was roughly 15 as far as I can remember. And my mother was an addict and an alcoholic. And then I started smoking cigarettes first. I think a lot of us, that was our gateway.
Oh, yeah. We had the green belt is where we would go. And that's where you could be off campus and smoke.
I love
It'd be so cool.
Smokers Hill. Anyway, so I was stealing cigarettes out of my mother's purse. She smoked Parliaments, which had a recessed filter. And I thought and I didn't necessarily like it, but I had to do it because that's what the cool kids do.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. And then I remember my friend Bill Heckler. His real name was Heckler. We had heard that you can get high from airplane glue.
Oh, boy.
So we took baggies, sandwich bags, and put the airplane glue in the baggie and then put it up to our mouth and you hyperventilate. I got so high in my parents' backyard with Bill Heckler. One of the first highs I ever got. I remember it was autumn. There were leaves on the ground, and I remember being risen up from the ground. I was hallucinating majorly.
Yeah.
And I could hear the leaves, but I felt like I was above the leaves. And we were laughing hysterically. And his face was contorted. I'm sure mine was. It was almost like an LSD trip. But that was the beginning. And then I discovered that my mother had pills in her purse. And I knew a little bit about pills because, again, I was born in the 50s. So this was the 60s. And I was a stone's throw from San Francisco. And so I kept hearing about the Haight-Ashbury and the hippies up there. And they were smoking marijuana. They were taking LSD and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And there was Woodstock and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and the Grateful Dead. And I'm this little wimpy boy in the suburbs. And so gradually, I started to experiment with the drugs, and my mother had uppers and downers. And then, as I know today, alcoholism and drug addiction is progressive. So it just progressed. And then by the time I was a junior, I was really into it. And I was sneaking up to Smokers Hill, and I was cutting class. And we would go to San Francisco all the time because it was only like 20 minutes away. And we used to get 5-finger lids. They called them lids. And after a while, we began to call it dirt weed because it was cheap weed. There was a lot of stems and seeds in it.
Blue weed, Mexican weed.
Mexican weed. It was dirt weed. And we used to get a big bag of it, I guess for $10. And then it went on to the music scene, which I have been interested in most of my life. And on Sundays, there would be free concerts in Golden Gate Park. And this was like 1968. I was a junior. 69, I was a senior. 69, 70, I graduated in 70. The Grateful Dead used to play for free. Or the Jeffersons Airplane, or Janis Joplin, or the Chambers Brothers, or the Sons of Champlin, or Beautiful Day, all these wonderful bands. But back then, they were just good bands. They were just good local. The Grateful Dead went on to be a gigantic global phenomena. But I'm telling you, in 1969, they were just a San Francisco band. And everybody knew them, and they were a good local band. and you drank cheap wine and you dropped LSD and you had your tie-dye shirt on, and I liked it. And the hippies were cool. It was peace and love. They were very into peace. They were also ahead of their time as far as the environment goes. They were later known as tree huggers. I consider myself a tree hugger today.
That's why you were hugging that tree the other day.
And I have peace signs on my shirts, and that's still a part of me. But and then eventually I moved to San Francisco. I barely graduated from high school because I had cut so much, and I had decided that partying and drugs and alcohol were way more important than school. So I just getting straight A's as a freshman, as a senior, barely graduating. And then it was like gears. It went from second gear into third gear. And I moved away from my family and got an apartment in Marin County, which is the other side of San Francisco. Very nice. I was living with a girl. Janice was her name. And also in high school, I had girlfriends, and I had my son, which happened. He was born when his mother and I were 18. And that was like a real whoa, because girls have always been a part of the story too. But we put the baby up for adoption. Her and I we were partiers. We couldn't even hardly take care of ourselves, let alone a little baby.
Yeah.
So the baby was put up for adoption. There was no such thing as an abortion. And that's sad, that whole story, because Martha got the worst of it, being in a home for unwed mothers. His mother was Martha.
Oh,
But her and I keep in touch, and he eventually found me via 23andMe. And I have 2 grandchildren.
oh, wow.
Blows my mind. My granddaughter started college this year.
My, how time flies.
Oh,
So I never knew that you had your son at 18.
I was 18 and so was Martha.
I
We were still in high school.
assumed, which is so wrong, that you were just married and that
We never got married.
Yeah.
To this day, I'm not sure if she really wanted to or not, but I thought about it, and I remember thinking, Roger, you just made a big mistake. And if you marry Martha, that's just going to be another mistake on top of the mistake you just made. And it's not fair to her or yourself or the baby.
Yeah.
Because all I cared about was, when am I going to San Francisco to get more? And when's the next concert, and what disco are we going to? I didn't care about anything else. I was just party.
Oh, you were young. Yeah.
And my story, I've heard people say in the rooms of AA that my story's in 3 segments. There was fun, and then there was fun with trouble, and then there was just trouble, or problems, if you will. And that was my story. And I don't speak for Alcoholics Anonymous. I speak for myself. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and it saved my life. And it's the reason I have a life today, and a good life. But I also acknowledge that there's other ways to get sober. I'm a fan of NA. I've been to HA. I know Crystal Meth Anonymous, CMA. A lot of people I know have gotten a lot of help from that.
What is HA?
Heroin. And then there's MA, Marijuana Anonymous, because I was what do they call it? Wake and Baker. Wake and Bake. Remember that?
Mm-mm.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, yeah, my son found me on 23andMe, but that kind of goes into the future.
I'm
I lived
curious.
with Janice.
Curious, when you were using back then, was there a reason other than I just wanted to party, or was that mainly the reason?
I think if I really diagnose it, it was a need to fit in.
Okay.
I wasn't really escaping anything. My story is different from a lot of people, in as much as being born just outside San Francisco, I never struggled too much with the gay thing. I hear a lot of people that come from Nebraska or South Dakota, and that was one of the reasons that they got high.
Yeah.
Mine, it was fun.
Yeah.
I wanted to fit in. I liked to dance, and I loved music. And back then, from the time I was in maybe a junior in high school until maybe 1980, it was fun. I didn't have a whole lot of consequences.
That's how I started out too.
Yeah.
I felt so accepted at the city nightclub with the gay boys before they could go to Amber's and Silverado. And all I wanted to do was dance and just hang out all night long. And I was accepted. They didn't want to sleep with me, so that was cool. And we were the best of friends. And that is the fun part. For me, that was before the drugs came. And I didn't drink a lot then. And I just smoked a little weed, partied, did a little ecstasy, danced all night, and had a blast. I like how you said fun with trouble and trouble.
And then just trouble.
I've never heard that before, ever in my life.
I've heard it many times in meetings. Or they'll say fun with problems and then just problems.
No, I like how you said the trouble.
Well, that's how it was.
A lot of trouble.
That's how it was for me. The 70s were a blast. Was it you? No, I don't remember who. My memory's getting bad, but somebody was talking recently. Oh, it was Lacey yesterday about, a lot of people do, about the 70s and how fun it was. I'm short. Take a look at me. I loved wearing platforms. I had about 5 different pair, and I worked those
That's my
things.
daddy right there. Yeah.
Every chance I could. I didn't wear them to work. Probably didn't wear them to my parents' house, but the rest of the time, I was always in platforms and bell bottoms. The bell bottoms had to be over the platform to the ground. And I loved it. And it was disco, baby. Gloria Gaynor and Donna Summers and The Last Dance. When I had a wonderful time. The 70s, there was my first major problem. And it didn't ruin the whole decade for me, but it did for probably close to a year. In 1976, I was living in San Francisco. I had moved to San Francisco full time, and I had a boyfriend. We lived on Castro Street first, and then we moved to Polk Gulch, for anybody who knows San Francisco. And that was the gay mecca. It was the center of the gay world before Castro Street. Okay. So I'm that old. And there was lots of hustlers, lots of bars. It was fun. Lots of restaurants, lots of nightlife. And if you're a young gay guy, and I had a partner, and of course I knew how to pick him because he'd been in San Quentin, Vietnam, and he went on to be a heroin user. So, when they say broken picker, I got one of those. But I loved him and he loved me. And we were together for years. And one night we had one of our little fights.
Is that the one?
You'll hear. Don't jump the gun, girlie.
Oh, look, I just want our listeners to know, because I called you daddy, that one, you're not my father, but it's a nickname.
I'm not old enough to be your father.
Oh, you're so
almost.
You see, 18?
My son is over 50, so.
So am I.
Yeah.
I just sound 21, but I just wanted the listeners to know that daddy is a term of affection that is now like your nickname, and it's hard for me to call you Roger anymore.
You don't have to call me Roger. I'm used to it now. It's a term of endearment.
It is.
In my time, I've been called many things. I'm just grateful they don't call me faggot anymore.
Amen.
That one used to really hurt.
Go back to the guy that you loved. I want to get to this one. So
Jerry and I were very much in love. We lived right off of Polk Street. It was a bad part of town. Not so much Polk Street, but we were around the corner going towards the Tenderloin. And so, again, if San Francisco, the Tenderloin is a bad neighborhood. Anyway, one night, Jerry and I had one of our fights. And we used to fight. He never hit me, but we would scream and yell. Occasionally, he would pick up like a brass ashtray, and I could feel it fly by my head. Wow. But he never actually hit me.
Oh, jeez.
And we were furious. I couldn't tell you why. I'm pretty sure, as usual, we were real loaded. Another thing that stands out about that apartment, we used to love to drink Colt 45. Malt liquor. And we had, I know it's disgusting, but we loved it back then. We had this beautiful china cabinet in the dining room. It was built in an old style San Francisco building. And on top of this beautiful china cabinet, we erected a castle made out of Colt 45.
I don't even know if I've ever seen a Colt 45 can.
I don't know that they sell them anymore, but it's the same thing as Country Club or Rainier Ale or Mickey's Big Mouth. Those are all malt liquor.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to drink, beer doesn't work for me because I got to drink so much. Malt liquor's, I think, 2.5 times as strong as a normal beer.
Like
I
that.
learned
So
something new today.
I never even messed with them. And I used to have a car where the emergency brake was in the middle between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. And there was just enough room for me to fit a nice Colt 45 bottle or can.
Just
And
perfect.
with my little tacky little brown bag. And that became like a trademark with me. Whenever I showed up, I had this can of Colt 45. I didn't care if it was Country Club or I got to where I liked Mickey's Big Mouth. And anyway, I'm getting off the story here. The worst thing that happened in the 70s. So Jerry and I had a big fight and he left. And I was sitting there just mad, thinking,
It's my
you
favorite story
bastard. I thought, where's it? I don't even remember asking him where he was going to go. I think I just figured that he was going to go meet somebody and have a little fling. So I sat there for a little while and I thought, F you, I'm going to too. And so I got dressed up. But mind you, we live right around the corner from Polk Street. And Polk Street's full of action. And it was also in that time, it was known for prostitutes, mostly male prostitutes. And so I wasn't really, into paying for it, but I thought, oh, whatever, we'll see what happens. And so I walked a couple blocks and there was this guy standing in a doorway. And I got up enough nerve, probably liquid courage, to go over to him. And he was strange, but we talked briefly and I invited him back to our place. I knew Jerry wasn't there. So he came back. And we sat there for quite a while. And I really don't remember. This was many, many years ago. I really don't remember what we talked about. I don't remember whether we did drugs. We probably smoked some pot. I know we smoked cigarettes. I sat on the couch and he sat right next to me, not up against me, but very close. And we just sat there for a long time and he hardly talked.
You said he was boring.
He was boring. He
Yeah.
hardly talked. Me, I hardly shut up, for those of you that know me. And I'm used to pulling conversations out of people, but it became boring. And I was loaded and I got tired. And so I remember saying to him, I'm tired. I'm going to go in and go to bed. And I said, you're welcome to sleep here on the couch, or you can come in and sleep with me, or you can just leave. It's your choice. And I don't remember him having any sort of a reply. And then I remember seeing him out of the corner of my eyes reach into his jacket pocket. And I just thought, cigarettes. And I wasn't staring at him, but like I said, he was sitting literally maybe 6 or 8 inches from me on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
And he reached into his pocket and then he had a gun. And he reached over and he shot me.
Oh my gosh.
You should have seen my face the first time I heard this story.
I have people in AA that know me for a long time who always want me to tell this story. I don't usually because people get lost in it and then I have to answer questions for 30 minutes. But yeah, obviously I live to tell about it. He was a psychopath. He was probably a homophobic serial killer. It turned out that in the same neighborhood, they found a body within 2 weeks when this happened to me. And I'm unclear. I don't remember if it was 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after. And then then after it happened, I jumped up and I thought, oh my God, it stung, but I wasn't in a tremendous amount of pain because you're in shock. And I remember running around. I got up and ran down the hall to the kitchen, and he ran after me. And then we went into the kitchen, and I remember tussling around with this guy. And he wasn't big. He was thin. And I was in shock. So I think I stood up to him pretty good. And then he went running around the apartment. I imagine looking for something to steal, I assume. I don't know.
True.
And then I remember, this is a higher power thing. I remember standing there and I remember thinking, you need to get him out of here. And and then I said to him, I've got neighbors and I'm sure they heard that gunshot and I'm sure somebody called the police and they're on the way. Where that came from, like I said, it was probably God.
Right.
But he left. And I'm standing there in the kitchen and I'm like, oh God. And then I was afraid that he was going to come back and finish me off. I've heard a lot of people, victims of gun violence or other kinds of violence, say that. And so then I was scared he was going to come back. So I locked the door. And this was 1976. No 911.
There was no 911.
No, in 1976, no.
Shut up.
And I had on this kind of blouse thing. And I remember looking down and I've got blood coming out of my abdomen.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
And I'm thinking, oh boy, okay, you got to make some decisions here, kiddo. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? So I called the police and gave them the information. And then I really went into shock. And that's where it gets a little gory because then I started vomiting. And when you vomit, you've got lots of pressure in your abdomen. And I had a big hole in my abdomen.
Oh, boy.
So when I vomited, the blood went squirting. Anyway,
Yeah.
That's as gross as it gets. By a power greater than myself, I didn't die. And I remember having an out-of-body experience when I got to the hospital. Another thing, I'm forever grateful that I was in San Francisco and they had San Francisco General Hospital with a trauma center. And they were used to gunshot wounds and knife wounds. In a big city, they are. Had I been living in Medford, I'd be dead. Or pick your wherever out in the boonies somewhere. And I remember I'm on a stretcher. And I remember them bringing me into an operating room, I imagine. And I remember it was very white. And everybody talks about the white light.
Yeah.
And then I remember I couldn't feel my body. I felt like an ice cube. And everything just felt like it was away. And I really felt like it was an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
I remember they put me on, I would assume, the operating table, but it felt like ice. I felt like I was a block of ice and they were putting me on another block of ice. And everything was really white. And that's the last thing I remember. And the worst part of that whole story is what I did to my parents. Because that's the sad part. My poor parents, they were good people. They were old-fashioned people. She was from South Dakota and he was from Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't get the gay thing. They certainly didn't get the drugs thing. And Roger lives in San Francisco with a man for years and years. I never really came out to them, but they were beautiful people. They really were. And this hurt them so. Big family, and they'd have to come and visit me every day. And I was in intensive care for 2 weeks. And if you're in intensive care for 2 weeks, you're in bad shape.
Yes.
And then, So anyway, I live to tell about it.
There's a reason. Yeah, there's a reason for everything, and everything has a reason.
I really do believe that.
That's my motto.
Roger has survived death a few times. And honestly, I know a lot of people in AA. Roger is nicer and kinder and including and being inclusive to the newcomer more than almost any other person I know. Don being another one. And I tell you this all the time.
And that's
he
the
had
reason.
bigger things for you.
Exactly. I believe that too.
Mm-hmm. I believe that with all my heart.
Because I love going up to the newcomer. I race to the newcomer because the newcomers are known to hit the door quick.
And your motives behind it. And I'm just being honest here. Not everybody rushes to the newcomer for the right reason.
No.
Okay, I personally stayed away from the newcomer because they scared me. They scared the bejesus out of me. And I had Scott C. and the Darryls that I learned to trust that had been in recovery for years that were my rock, my foundation. I didn't have to worry about them. So me personally, if CMA has just started becoming popular, but if you came into our room and you were a hot mess getting high and stuff, I avoided you like the plague.
Unless they look really scary, I go right over to
I'm
them.
just saying that I admire it about
I know. People tell me that.
and your
And I
motives are
realize that it's not easy for a lot of people. I realize that. For me, it comes automatic.
good. Well, and you're not trying to sleep with them,
No.
which is something I admire even more because we both know people
13th
that have.
stepping is a real thing.
And I've never done it ever. So I 14
I have
step.
to be honest. Once in a while, I think, oh, you are just adorable. But I wouldn't sleep with them.
I think some of them are just adorable too, but sleeping
for
with
those
them
that
never
don't know,
crossed
I
my
wouldn't
mind.
sleep with them.
For those listening that don't know, the 13th step is picking up and dating someone
in their first year.
in their first year.
That's what a lot of us believe. There's no rules in
Right.
AA. It's just an unspoken thing.
Yeah.
It's out of respect, and we call it no 13th stepping. Because for the simple reason people come into AA and they're extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And sad and depressed and a whole range of usually negative emotions.
And I think
And you
some
don't
people
wanna
are
take
looking for love in the
advantage
wrong
of
way
it.
as well.
Oh, sure. There's plenty of that. They come into AA looking for a husband or a wife.
Well, when you get into AA, there's an empty spot that was filled by booze, drugs, whatever your
Very
addiction.
good point.
And I think that you try to fill it in any way you can,
Yeah.
especially when you're new, because your mind is still wet and you can't think
Foggy.
straight. Yeah. And you're just looking for that connection, right?
That's why it was such a safe spot for me. I knew they didn't want to
Well,
sleep
and
with
that's
me.
another thing that you want to do is make them feel safe and welcome.
You're good
Because
at
a
that.
lot of people talk about their initial arrival at AA, and some of them will say, nobody talked to me.
Some of them are jilted. No, I hear you.
And
Mhm.
that's sad. And that it ticks me off because why wasn't there someone there for them? Were they not cute enough? Or that's my cynical self. But
Peter and I talk about this all the time. I think the greatest thing about our group, okay, is that we are so loving, patient, kind, tolerant, inclusive of so many different areas of recovery, so many
Different
different kinds of
lifestyles.
people. So we're just open. We just love you until you can love yourself. We
And
are so good about
that's
it.
very important.
Mhm, very
I
important.
remember my first meeting and I didn't know anybody. And it was a church full of gay men in San Francisco,
So
but they made me feel welcome.
Me too.
I don't remember any of them, but
to that point, you were in intensive care. You got out of intensive
I got out of intensive care, and my life changed. My friends and family moved me out of the apartment, and the apartment was put up for rent. I lived with my parents. I had a good job, so I got unemployment and I got state disability, and I had no expenses. And I'm a budding alcoholic addict in San Francisco, and they're giving me morphine on a regular basis. So you can figure out what happened after that.
What happened to the break?
He was scared. We didn't break up, but he wasn't really there for me much. A little bit. When we eventually got back together, but he freaked out just like most people. But like I said, I was living with my parents, had no expenses at all. And they were giving me drugs all the time. And so I remember probably less than a week after I got out of the hospital, I met up with some friends and we were back on Polk Street. And I'm flying on the morphine. And all of a sudden, I saw this guy, and it turned out to be him, the guy who shot me. And so I said, oh my God. I told my friends, I said, that's the guy that shot me. I said, keep an eye on him. I'm going to go call the cops. And I did. And they came. And for the next 6 months, it was court. And he was under 21. I was in my early 20s. So they tried to make me into the bad older man trying to pick up a young guy or whatever. But he was they were able to connect him to a murder as well as what happened to me. And so I know he went to prison. I don't know anything else.
Wow. How incredible.
I hope he doesn't know where I am. I never think about it. But I can laugh about it. Another God thing.
Yeah.
I can laugh about it today. It wasn't funny back then. And because I didn't have any expenses and I had lots of money, I was just buying lots of drugs.
Yeah.
And then I was entertaining at my parents' house. That ain't a good idea. My parents were very Catholic, very old-fashioned, very sweet. And they got wind of the drug parties that were happening in the back of their house.
Oh my God.
And that wasn't good. So I remember eventually moving on and going back to work, and the party continued. I barely missed a beat. It just became a story to tell. And I went back to the discos when I could, and I went back to work, and Jerry came back. We got a new apartment. Life went on. And then the next thing that is worth talking about was in 1983. I had a good friend, Michael. And Michael and I loved to party. We were, in those days, and they love it now, I hesitate to say it in front of Julie because it'll probably come back to haunt me, but they called us Chalk Queens because we loved to go dancing. And in San Francisco back in those days, I think it's pretty much still the same. There were like the Castro clones, the boys who wore Izod shirts and 501 jeans and very short coiffed hair, and they all looked the same. We called them Castro clones.
I guess.
And then there was the leather guys down south at Market on Folsom Street.
I've seen them.
And the motorcycles and the chaps and the whips.
The ass hanging out of the chaps.
The whips and chains. And I was never into that. And I resented the Castro clones. And I was total Chuck Queen in my platforms and big hair and and let's go dancing. And I had a pack of friends.
That's
How old were you in
there was
1983?
Farrah, early 30s.
You definitely could be my daddy because I graduated high school at 7.
Yeah, I could, I suppose.
I always said the higher the hair, the closer to God.
Oh, I had one friend, his name was Chris, but we called her Farrah because she had long blonde hair and she used to love to, she would blow dry it back and then spray the hell out of it. She had these big wings like Farrah Fawcett.
That's awesome.
And then there was Sicky Ricky, there was Sophie, Liz. Anyway, there was a pack of guys that I used to go out with. And it was heavy drug use and heavy drinking, but a lot of fun.
And you managed to keep a job.
I kept a job.
Is it the same job that you kept for 10 years?
I was hired by this company when I was 21. And I stayed with them for 34 years throughout my drug and alcohol career.
And they stayed
Even
with
if
you.
I got 3 or 4 hours sleep, I made it to work the next day.
Was that like a rule for you?
It was one of the good things that happened for me. I never lost my job. I never lost my home. I've always had a car, but I was empty inside. But the worse it got. Anyway, in 1983, Michael and I decided we needed to go to Hollywood, California, because we had done all the bars in San Francisco. We'd done all of them numerous times, and we needed something new. Some new boys, some new bars, new music. So we're going to Hollywood, like they say on one of my favorite shows, American Idol. You're going to Hollywood. Like good little alcoholics and addicts, we planned ahead. It was like packing for a trip, only we packed big bottles of Smirnoff, big bags of weed, big bags of cocaine, and bags of Quaaludes. And off we went down Highway 101 to Los Angeles. By the time we got there, little Roger was pretty frickin' wasted. And we went to the first bar and it was not a good experience, so we left. And we thought, okay, that was a mistake. I think we need more booze. So we went to the liquor store and got more booze. Was not a good idea. Then we took off for the other side of Hollywood because we wanted to go to this place called Studio One. And And
Wow.
this was when Studio 54 was a big deal in New York, or maybe it was after, but that's where the name came from. Anyway, we were excited about that. And we might see some celebrities. And even though we were shit-faced, just shit-faced, and we didn't probably, it felt like we drove maybe a mile or two, and we got pulled over. And I remember Michael sitting next to me, and he kept telling me, Roger, you can do this.
Now, were you driving?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
And he kept saying, Roger, you can do this. The lights are sirens in the back. And I'm like, yeah, I can do this. Yeah, I can do this. We'll pull it off. Don't worry. And then the cop comes up to the door. If you've ever been pulled over, you're usually tense. I don't think I was tense. I was too loaded. And the window came down and they want your driver's license. And I gave him my driver's license and he's got his flashlight and he's looking at my driver's license. And he goes, so what's your address? And I remember sitting there and I remember trying and telling myself, you can do this. You can do this. And I remember going, 20. With that, the door flung open. He yanked me out of that car really hard and threw me face first into the asphalt.
Oh, jeez.
Next thing we know, they're going through the car and there's 6 cop cars and they've got rifles and we're face first in the asphalt. The cops aren't like that in San Francisco. They're worse down there. But we had so much drugs, keeping in mind we had just arrived in Southern California. So we had all these drugs that we hadn't had a chance to take yet.
Yeah.
They're probably thinking you're dealers.
Exactly.
And you're just freaking
They got
parties.
us for distribution and taking it down the
Across
state.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't go across state lines, but we went from Northern California to Southern
One county to
California.
another.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the shit hit the fan. We both went to jail for quite some time. And then they let me out of jail so I could go to work. And they let us both out of jail in LA and we could transfer our sentence to San Francisco.
Okay.
And so I thought, okay. And then I remember the judge and the policeman and stuff saying, you're going to get such and such amount of time for this, but if you go to AA, we'll cut that in half or whatever. And I thought, oh, okay, and I'll do that. And so that was my first court order to AA.
That's how I got to boot camp.
Yeah.
Time
was
cut.
31, I think I was 31 years old. And I went to Trinity Church on Bush Street in San Francisco. And I was a little nervous, but not too much. And there were a lot of guys there, and they were very nice. And I'd heard of AA, but I just, from the very beginning, I remember thinking, I think it's great that these people stay sober, and I'm happy for them. And they were very nice. And I've never really had a problem with spirituality, and they were kind, and I had to be there. So I made the best of it. And I made a few friends, and I hung around for as long as I had to. And then pretty soon, those of you that go to meetings, you see the little white papers. I signed one yesterday, and I told the guy, I said, that's how I got here.
That's how I got there too.
Yeah. So hopefully they'll get a little something out of that.
Right.
Because I know I had shame. I used to try and hide it. No, I didn't want people to know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it didn't work because I didn't want it. I wasn't open-minded to it. I remember thinking, I'm happy for these guys. And I met this one guy, Jack, and we hung out. And he had more than 20 years, and he was very kind to me, and I thought he was very interesting. There was no sex or anything. He was never my sponsor, but he was like a big brother kind of thing.
Right.
And he took me to meetings, and he was a delight. But he had a lot of demons. And I remember him telling me about his family and how much baggage he had around his family. And it broke my heart when he had he had a bad life, but he had more than 20 years sober. And I looked up to him. And we made plans, probably to go to dinner and a meeting. That was usually it. And I went over to his house, and he loved classical music, and he had the classical music blaring, and I'm knocking on the door and ringing the bell, and never answered. I thought, this is weird. And I tried for quite a while. I finally went away. I came back, I guess the next day or 2 days later, and the music was still blaring, and he wouldn't answer the door. And I thought, wow, this is weird. I hope he's okay. He was inside. They found him with a big pile of empty vodka bottles.
Oh, what
He
a
sat in
shame.
there and drank himself to death.
After 20 years sober.
More than 20 years. I think he had 25 years,
Well,
if memory serves me well.
Wow.
And that hit me hard. And I thought, oh, fuck, maybe this doesn't work after all. I was just sad. I don't know that I made that sort of judgment call, but
Yeah.
it was a sad time. And then shortly after that, I didn't have to go to meetings anymore, and I didn't. And I went merrily on my way. And we went from third gear into fourth gear, and the party continued. And this was the decade that was fun with trouble.
what was
You know,
the
I got-
turning point for you, though? Where? I don't.
The turning point for me didn't come until another 9 years, because everything had gotten so dark after I went back out for the second time. I didn't care about anything. Because the first time I got arrested and went back out for, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years before I made it back. And I made it back because I got arrested again. I'd moved out of San Francisco. My parents had died. I had an inheritance. I was able to buy a house. But I couldn't afford it in San Francisco even back then. So I bought a house. And then I met Eric, and we lived there for 20 years. I lived there for 22 years.
Wow.
And we were alcoholics and addicts. And about 15 years into it, I got arrested again for drunk driving. And so we did the same thing over. And I got court ordered, and I was older, and my disease had progressed, and the fun had diminished.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just go to work, go to your car. I used to get a coffee cup, a paper coffee cup, and I would have a bottle of Chardonnay in the car, and I would pour it into the coffee cup so I'd have something to drink on the way home.
Chardonnay.
Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm.
And I would usually have roaches in the ashtray, and I'd smoke a roach and drink Chardonnay on the way home. And by the time I got home, I was pretty lit. And Eric was there. Eric wasn't there. He was a meth head, and I was a pill-popping alcoholic. So we were quite the couple. That went on for a lot of years. But he helped me. He was supportive of me the second time I got arrested. And I met people. And I stayed sober for 11 months and something, until one night he wasn't home. And I remember sitting in my bedroom watching TV and or whatever. And I remember thinking, my disease talking to me and telling me, Roger, you couldn't be an alcoholic because it's been 11 months. I was keeping track. It was 11 months and 2 weeks. I was coming up on a year.
Yeah.
But I was a dry drunk because I had stopped going to meetings a long time ago. I still knew a few people in AA, but I didn't have a sponsor. I wasn't working the steps. I didn't have a program. I was just not drinking. Some people call it white knuckling. And I convinced myself that night, it was 11 months and something. You couldn't be an alcoholic. Alcoholics can't go 11 months and 2 weeks without drinking.
Yeah.
You're
right.
probably okay now.
Yeah.
And then I remember thinking, what about the drugs? And I went through the same thing. You're not a drug addict. Drug addicts can't go 11 months and 2 weeks without drugs. You're all right now. And so I went down the list. I had all these excuses. And I went down the list. You better not do cocaine, because you know what happens when you do cocaine. And that's a hard drug. You could go back to prison or jail. And then you know what happens when you drink vodka or tequila, and how fucked up you get and what a mess you are. Better stay away from that. And I just went down the list. If you do Valiums, you know you're going to get hooked again, and you'll be filling that prescription once a week.
It's like the rules that I hear a lot of people have in their disease. I always had rules too about when to drink, when not to drink, never to do it before work. All these rules and guides. They got so complicated I couldn't keep track of what my own rules towards the end.
I'm okay if I only drink at night.
Only wine, no hard liquor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one, I crossed that line because I said the vodka and the tequila, you know what happens. And then I got down to marijuana. Marijuana's no big deal.
Right.
It grows from the ground. It's organic, for Christ's sakes. And Eric, my partner, was growing it in the backyard. So I don't even have to buy it. So yeah, I think that would be okay. So sure enough, I went and rolled me up what they call a fatty. And I got ripped because I haven't been stoned in a year. So your tolerance goes way down. I remember sitting there just going, oh my God, I'm so stoned. This is so great. And I remember being smug and thinking, I found the solution. Those poor suckers in AA, they just don't get it. I can just smoke pot in the evening and I'll be fine. And I did that for maybe a week. And then if you know a lot about marijuana and the high that you get, one of the symptoms that often accompanies it is paranoia.
Yes.
And Eric wasn't home one night and all of a sudden I heard noises and I thought, oh my God. And I got really paranoid. And my disease decided to tell me, you can just have one glass of wine. Just one. You can only have one.
Right.
Because if you have more than that, and so I had one glass of wine, and I remember loving that and thinking, oh, I want another one. And I remember thinking, no, you can't have another one because that's what alcoholics do. And you got to prove to all those poor suckers in AA that you got the answer, that you have found the way. And it was a matter of less than a week where I was pedal to the metal, drugs and alcohol around the clock, 2 bottles of wine, weed all day long. And then that was the beginning of the worst part of my life, from like the early to mid 90s until 2000, because it just, there was the fun, and then the fun with trouble, and then just trouble. And that was just trouble. It was problems. It was nightmares. It was dark. It was pathetic. We all know what it's like. Everybody has to reach bottom. But I hated myself, and I hated my job, and I hated my boss. And Eric is a meth head, and I got to kick him out of here. And nobody understands, and nobody gives a shit anyway. And I was burying myself in a pity party.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I stop? Nobody gives a fuck about me. And this is just the way it is. I remember that too. I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm really high. And this is just the way I'm going to die. This is the way it's always going to be, a big bottle and drinking all the time. And then one day the only thing that was good was the job. And I kept the house, and I paid the mortgage, and I had the car, but I became an empty shell. All I cared about was when I was going to get more. And then one day I got sent home from work. And I didn't drink when I went to work because I knew they could smell it, but I had numerous prescriptions. So I was very well medicated all the time. And one of the things I liked a lot was muscle relaxers. And I would take lots of them every day. And after a while, they started relaxing my brain, and I began slurring a lot. And so I got sent home from work. And it wasn't the first time. But in the court, at this time, I'd had that job for 25 years. And I didn't want to lose it because that's where I was going to retire from. And I had 25 years invested in that job.
Yeah.
And I need a job to pay the mortgage. And what am I going to do if I don't have a job? And then that really hit me. That's what really hit me. I'd like to say that it was because I knew I was an alcoholic and I needed to stop, but it was really that really got me. And so I went back into treatment, and third time in treatment. And I remember the counselor in treatment, I remember sitting with him and giving him my long, sad story about why I have such a bad life and all the reasons that I need to drink and use. And if you had my life, you'd understand. And don't you feel sorry for me? And I remember him looking at me and he said, Roger, why don't you just give it a shot? What do you have to lose? And I'll never forget that. I wouldn't know that guy if he walked in the door right now, but he really hit me hard with that because I had nothing to lose. I hated myself. And another part that was happening along at this time, I had cancer. I'd been diagnosed with cancer, and I didn't tell anybody.
Wow.
Because they were already on my case about you'd be such a nice guy if you didn't drink so much, or if you don't stop taking the drugs, you're going to lose your job, or on and on. All the people were hassling me. And everybody can relate to that when you're fucked up all the time.
Yeah.
I remember them saying, God, you'd be such a nice guy if you didn't drink so much. Up yours. Mind your own business.
Yeah.
And so I didn't tell anybody. And I remember my mantra became, F it. Who cares? Nobody cares. If the drugs don't kill me, the alcohol will. If the alcohol doesn't kill me, the cancer will. And screw it. Nobody cares. That's where I went. That was the ultimate pity party for me. And somehow, by the grace of God or a higher power, the universe, whatever you want to call it, I snapped out of that. And because of the courts and the policemen along the way, I knew where to go. I knew that there were people in AA, and it worked for them. One day at a time, they'd stayed sober for years. And I knew them. I would see them at the grocery store, and I'd be so scared because I'd have all this booze in my cart, and they'd have kale and celery and carrots. And I'd be like, oh, God. And it finally hit me. And so I went into treatment, and I mentioned this story with the counselor. And then I remember one night after I went into treatment, because I'd been in treatment 3 times, I was stealing drugs. They take you into a little room, a little drug closet, they call it, and they dispense the drugs. And when you first arrive, you get a lot. I hope I'm not giving anybody ideas, but especially if you...
They never gave me drugs in treatment.
Yeah, that's because it was meth. If you're an alcoholic, they're afraid you're going to have seizures.
Right.
And so they give you Ativan, and they give you a lot. I was also on muscle relaxers. It's different for people that were into stimulants, that you don't get the same treatment.
Right.
Because they've got doctors and nurses that are dispensing this stuff, or nurses' aides, I should say, at the treatment center. But I knew the routine because I'd been in treatment twice before. And you go into this little closet, and they get the pills, and then they turn their back, and then they give them to you, and maybe they turn their back to put them back. I'll take 2 and put 3 under my tongue or in my pocket, or I cup them in my hand. And I was getting pills out of the pill closet that way. And I accumulated, and I can laugh about it today, but it's really scary. I got up to 5 at one point. And I remember taking them at certain times when I was really anxious or afraid or depressed or something. And I remember sitting in the treatment center and going, I showed them, didn't I? Here I am. I'm nice and high. And they think I'm in recovery. Very crazy, very self-defeating, very insane.
Yeah.
And one night, this is when it all came to an end. One night, I had my own room. I had 1 pill left. And I tossed and turned, and I couldn't sleep. And God and I, higher power for those that don't like the God word or whatever you want to call it, we had a long talk that night. And I was in this treatment center so I could change my life, so I could save my life, so I could finally beat the drugs and the alcohol that had been slowly killing me all these years, and keep my job and my sanity and maybe do something about the cancer.
Yeah.
And so we decided together that I needed to get up and go to that drawer where the pill was and walk down the hall. And this was a treatment center. There were probably 30 people in there. So it was a public restroom, more or less. And I remember going in there and standing over the toilet and knowing what I needed to do with that pill. And I looked at the water for a long time holding that pill. And then I remember, I don't remember exactly what went through my head, but I dropped it into the toilet. And then I looked at it, and I stood there and I looked at it, and my drug addict brain told me, it hasn't dissolved yet, Roger.
Yeah.
You can reach in there and get it. I remember this so clearly because we talk about cunning, baffling, and powerful. That was the powerful part when I was willing to reach in there and get that pill out of a toilet.
Yes.
That lots of other people use. And that was an option. And I didn't do it. And I was shaking. I was probably crying. And I flushed it down and I watched it go poof. And that's my sobriety date.
That's awesome.
That was 2 days before Christmas in 2001. And that was the beginning. And I knew to go to AA.
That's one thing about AA. I think once you've gone for a minute, right, it's hard to forget about it when you're out there. Meaning,
Oh, yeah. It screws up your drinking, they say.
Screws up your high, I think.
Yeah. And I went back to the Sunday night gay men's meeting in Santa Rosa. And there's Carl sitting at the same goddamn table. He's been sitting there for years, smiling, good looking, cute, blonde guy. And he was the same size as me, the same age as me. And he'd lived most of his life in San Francisco. So we had a lot in common. Only Carl had been sober for a long time. I think at that point, probably 10 or 15 years. And he was nice to me. And he always used to tell me, Roger, if I can do it, you can do it too. And when he first told me that, I wanted to go over and bitch slap him. I'm tired of you getting condescending attitude or whatever. And now I say that to newcomers.
Yeah.
I say it all the time because it's true. There's no magic wand. Then there's one other thing that happened at 30 days. I was in Santa Rosa. I had made friends in the treatment center, the last treatment center I went in, and I was friends with this girl, and her boyfriend was celebrating 10 years. And we were like, wow, 10 years. Because her and I were basket cases, right? We were fresh out of rehab. And I sat there and my mind was all over the place. I was pretty much of a mess and I was still doubtful that I could do it. And I even had a little bit of, do I really want to do this? But again, I really believe in a higher power. And I remember sitting there anxious and messed up. And I got a little nudge. And it said, you should go talk to that guy. I didn't know him. I knew his girlfriend. I didn't know him. Okay, I guess it can't hurt. I talked to myself a lot.
I did too.
And so I did. I went over and I talked to him. And the one thing I took away from that, and it was something that I'd heard before in AA, it wasn't something brand new, but he told it to me in a way that I'd never heard it. And this was another moment that really changed things for me. Because I gave him my big sad story. Anyone who would sit and listen, I had a long sad story about poor Roger. If you had my life, you'd drink too. Izzy loves that one. I was so sad. And anyway, he just said to me, he looked at me and he said, Roger, you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is you grab that meeting schedule. And back in those days, it was paper meeting schedules, and you pick out which meeting you're going to go to. I lived in Northern California. There were lots of meetings to choose from every day. You choose one you're going to go to. And as the day unfolds, I remember this so clearly. I don't remember him, but I remember his words. You choose which meeting you're going to go to. And as the day unfolds, you do not make any excuses. You don't change your mind. My back hurts. I got a headache. My boyfriend wants to go out to dinner. You do not change your mind. This is where the top priority, number one priority came in for me. He said, this is your number one priority. You're going to make it to that meeting. And you do that every day. And you don't drink and you don't use in between meetings. And I sat there, and it always makes me emotional because I felt the hope. I actually felt the hope on my body, on my shoulders. I remember sitting there and thinking, oh my God, I can do that. He simplified it enough for me. I'd heard that before. We hear one day at a time or whatever, but I really heard it that night. And he gave me so much hope. And I remember sitting there thinking, even a loser like you, Roger, you can do that. It's simple enough. You just pick a meeting and you go every day and you don't drink and use in between. And that changed things for me. Again, I had 30 days and that was January of 2002.
When did you move to Oregon?
10 years ago, give or take.
Because that's when I met you at MCC.
Yeah, I used to come to MCC before I moved here, though, because I'm from the West Coast, and I have a lot of family in the Seattle area and San Francisco. So I would come to the West Coast once a year, and I would start in Seattle, and then I would come to Portland, because I knew way back then that I was going to wind up in Portland, that I couldn't afford San Francisco, and I liked Portland better than Seattle. But I would come to Portland, and I would go to MCC. I remember going to Rose City. I remember Billy. I remember James Kennedy, the more memorable people I remember.
James Kennedy was a back then.
Oh, yeah. And I remember those folks. And I would come into town, and Billy would remember me, and we'd go out for lunch. And that was probably 12 years ago, 13. But yeah, you give back what was given to you. And that's, other than keeping it as a top priority, that's the things that have made a difference in my life. And one more thing, I've seen an awful lot of people go out.
Seen a lot of people
and
die.
people say relapse is part of recovery. And I go, I don't agree with that. Relapse is a lack of recovery. And I've seen so many people die, and it continues to happen. It's the worst part about being in recovery, because people die. And I have never, ever seen anyone come back from a relapse and say, that was awesome.
Yeah.
I had a wonderful time. I highly recommend it. Never, ever have I heard those words. Everybody comes back shameful and guilty and sad and beat up and lost weight, and they look like shit. And I'm never going to go back. I never ever want to do that. That's what keeps me really in the center of AA. I'm like a cheerleader for AA.
I actually agree with you. And I think it's a matter of being ready.
It took me a long time.
I was on my 7th treatment center, and the lady said to me, Julie, I actually think we stand a shot. And because I had been sober 18 months and then relapsed. I had been sober 13 months and whatnot. And she said, I think you stand a shot. But girl, you have to find a meeting and stay there for the rest of your life, Julie. And like you, I was ready at that time. You know what I'm saying? And Billy was ready. I watched a couple people recently go back out and die. I worry about...
Or don't come back, and you never know what happened.
Or you see them in places that you never would expect to see them.
You would think, though, when I was using, my mother died of alcoholism and drug addiction. It was 1983. Same year I got arrested in LA. She died.
Graduated.
We watched her die. If you've ever watched anybody die of alcoholism, it ain't pretty. It's like dying of AIDS or cancer. It's awful. She turned very yellow and lost weight. And then she became what we call a wet brain, where she couldn't really make sense. She didn't know what was going on. It's almost like dementia, I guess. It was awful. And my father tried everything. We all did. But we all know you can't get anybody sober. You can't keep anybody sober. It doesn't work like that. She didn't want it, and it killed her. And I kept on going. And I loved that woman.
And you can't give anybody the gift of sobriety. They have to give it to themselves. All you can do is, I remember someone along the line telling me that they tell their sponsors and sponsees, and I do too, I can't keep you sober. There's no magic wand or a new pill that's been invented that's going to keep you sober. All I have for you is how I've done it and what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me. And had that conversation last week. Yeah. I wish I could give you the gift of sobriety, but I can't. You have to give you.
I can show you what worked for me and what didn't work for me and how I've been able to stay sober. The rest is up to you. It's all suggestions. Right. Some people come in and they think we have rules. There's no rules.
No.
And you don't have to believe in God. Another one I love is because we hear so much about the God thing.
Right.
And so many people have such a problem with God. Let it go. Okay. It's not about God. It's not about that word.
It's not.
You don't have to believe it. Listen to me.
I did.
You don't have to believe in anything. All you have to believe in is that recovery is possible.
I think
That's
the
all
only
you
thing
need.
you have to do to start off, just freaking go to a meeting and don't drink in between and go to a meeting.
Oh, it's
The
exactly what
rest-
you said.
The rest you will get. It takes time.
That's
Yep.
what happened for
Yep.
me when I was ready.
Mhm.
I wish I could have changed things, but that was my path. That's what I had to go through. I needed to suffer more.
At the beginning of our chat, you alluded to how great your life is today. And we've heard your story and what you went through. Give us a little bit about service work and the fellowship.
The first thing is that I dealt with cancer.
Yes.
And I've had cancer since, and I've dealt with it, and I'm still alive. I beat cancer multiple times. Of course, cancer comes back for now. I kept the job.
Kept the job.
The skin of my teeth and the union.
Oh,
Had I not been in a union, they would have gotten rid of me. But because of the union, I was not only able to go to treatment 3 times, but I got to keep that job. And I guess it was about 8 years after I got sober, I got to retire. I was 55 years old. No, it wasn't 8 years. It was 6, I guess. I got to retire at 55 with a full
Oh
pension and full medical. And that is a blessing from God.
Oh my Lord.
talk about
Because I
promises,
was
right?
I was not exactly an ideal employee. I showed up, but most of the time I had a bad attitude and I was fucked up.
No, not you, Daddy.
And I hated my boss, the last boss. I used to blame him for making me drink. So that's another good thing. And then I have had probably 10 or 12 sponsees over the years. I've been sober in San Francisco, Santa Rosa, Fort Lauderdale, and now Portland. I found out about my son, and I have grandchildren. Living in Portland, I was able to buy my home.
He has twins.
I have twins in Portland, yeah. They fight a little bit, but they get along pretty well.
We just fight
Tony
with you.
and Julie.
We don't fight with each other ever. We just fight with you.
And now Colleen calls me daddy once in a while. Jen will. I don't know if I'm
Jen
mentioned-
always calls you Daddy now.
Well, you're almost like the cruise director.
Yeah.
He is. Vanna.
Vanna when we play bingo.
Yeah.
That was given to me by some dear friends in Santa Rosa, California. Because I haven't changed much after the meeting when I lived in California.
18.
Vanna,
Roger does his arm. I can't
that's
show
bingo.
you, but he takes his hand and he's like, be 18. And he does it like a drag queen
Vanna
on the
pointing
float.
to.
And then he arranges outings like Julie, the cruise director.
Well, it came from a couple of girlfriends, a lesbian couple in California, and they would watch me, and they had more time. They were part of the group that I knew the second time around when I went back out. And there's some of the people that I used to see in the store, and they knew Eric, my boyfriend, and he worked for them at one point. So we had a relationship. And they probably wished that I was sober, but they knew they couldn't do anything. Anyway, I came back to AA, and we reignited our relationship. And they would watch me after the meetings. And I was the same back then as I am now. I would work the room. So how are you? Are you going to go out to eat? Let's go out to eat. And of course, nothing's changed there either.
No.
Where are we going? First question, where are we
Who are
going?
you sitting with?
And then it would be, there's a conference in Seattle that we're all going to. You want to go? Anyway, I like to organize events, and everybody pretty much knows that. And they came up to me one night and they said, Roger, you're like Julie, the cruise director on Love Boat. And it stuck. That's probably 20 years ago.
And I didn't know that. And that's what I called him at the park.
Oh, that's funny.
So, yeah, it was good.
I love fellowship, because that was another thing about my journey and why I was so against getting clean and sober, because for so many years I was part of that. Today, I think they call it club kids, but I was in the bars all the time. I was dancing and doing drugs.
Yeah.
And then I always loved rock shows. Going to rock shows, you get totally fucked up before you go. And then you bring a flask in and you got a bag stashed somewhere so you can snort some coke during the performance so you get the full effect, right? So you really enjoy it all the way. And this is the way drug addicts like me think. And when they tried to tell me, you can't drink or do drugs at all, or we don't drink and do drugs at all, and I thought, God, does that mean I have to go into a monastery? Or I thought my life was
in a
over.
monastery.
I thought I would never have fun again. And so that's one of the reasons I think that I like fellowship so much.
Yeah.
It's because we have so much fun and we're sober as a judge.
One of my favorite sayings, we aren't a glove lot.
Yeah. I want to really thank you for coming and sharing with us.
Oh, yeah. It's fun.
It's been amazing, I'm sure.
It's emotional. And I hope I gave a little bit of hope.
You did.
To people that are struggling. Yeah. Because that's really what it's all about.
That's what this podcast is all about. That's what we want to do. We want to share the stories.
I really think of David in that car, right? And wish he could have been listening to a podcast and he took a different route.
Yeah.
Can I have a couple of readings and then we're done?
Yeah. I want to say before you close out, thank you very much for being here. I so appreciate it. Having some faith in our show. And
yes, we're excited about it.
So really appreciate it. And in closing,
everybody that knows me knows that I have a thing for memes and inspirational quotes or whatever you want to call it. And some of them are just, this one I particularly like. I don't have all the answers for getting sober, but I do know this. It gets better. You are worth it. And it's possible.
Amen.
Amen. Love that.
And one more with hope. This is for the person who's really struggling out there. Like Carl used to tell me, if I can do it, you can do it too. And I showed him. He's in Hawaii now, but I wish I could see him and show him my 22-year chip. I know he'd be very happy. Okay. I hope you try. I hope you stick around enough days in a row until you get to the one that you look around and realize you're okay, that you are recovering and you're worth the work you're putting into yourself because you're worth it every damn day at a time.
Well said. Thank you so much. And
don't make me cry.
That one makes me cry, but it's true.
Yeah.
It is true.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the show. And be sure to go to our website to get links to things we talked about. And we'll be back again. Thanks.
Thank you, Daddy.
This is Peter, Real Recovery Podcast.
And this is Julie saying goodbye.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks to each and every one of you for lending us your ears and hearts. Your engagement is what fuels our passion and keeps this podcast thriving.
We cherish the moments we share here and hope they resonate with you. Whether you're on a daily commute, at the gym, or just taking a moment for yourself.
Make sure to head over to our website at realrecoverypodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest insights and uplifting stories from our community delivered straight to your inbox.
Click that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player too, so you can keep up with every new episode. It's your support that keeps our conversation alive and meaningful.
And if our stories have touched you, consider using the donate button on our site. Your contributions, no matter the size, are deeply appreciated. They help us continue our mission of sharing hope and healing.
Join us beyond the podcast and follow our journey on social media. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. All the links are on our site, so you can stay connected and be a part of the Real Recovery community every day.
Your likes, shares, and comments not only spread the message of recovery, but also remind us that we're all in this together.
So, until we meet again, remember that recovery is a journey, not a destination, and we'll be here to accompany you every step of the way to recovery, real recovery.
Thanks for listening.